All right. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining. This is CLO's first online event. We're kind of doing a discussion podcast sort of thing on Zoom, seeing as all of our classes are using it. Seemed like a pretty cool tool to try out. Dr. Steele had mentioned how other econ-oriented groups on campus were doing online events, so we decided to do one kind of in the nature of CLO, which is rather discussion-based with tons of audience members and back and forth between them. So Calvin and I are executive officers on CLO. Dr. Steele is the advisor for the organization. And then Kyle, Joe, and Alex are pretty much members. They show up to all of our events and stuff, are super supportive. So they've agreed to come on and have this discussion with us. And we're going to be discussing coronavirus, a few of the economics, the economic side of coronavirus in the United States, and maybe some how classical liberalism plays into government policies that are going on right now, maybe some criticisms or support for certain programs going forth, and what that looks like in a classical liberal society. Are we following that? Are we not following it? Are there better examples or worse examples in the world? And we'll see where that takes us. I don't know if we're going to cover all those topics. We kind of have a loose agenda, and we're just going to talk through it. So welcome, everyone. Thanks for coming.
Great, thank you.
So kind of the first thing I had up, which is rather econ oriented, was the Fed's actions with quantitative easing, lowering the interest rates to 0%, and then potential loan forgiveness, which I think opens a lot of doors. And that combined with the stimulus plan, I wanted to ask Dr. Steele and then kind of other people's opinions and thoughts. Do you guys see this as a gateway for universal basic income, universal health care, and loan forgiveness for students? Because I see universal basic income with the $1,200 just given out to American citizens, and universal health care. People are saying that private health care was not well suited to prevent this crisis, that people aren't getting treated because they don't have health insurance, and that loan forgiveness, I feel like with businesses being offered this by the Federal Reserve, do we see students crying out and going, why not us?
Sure. Let me start out and just say that the Classical Liberal Organization, CLO, has hosted events for the campus for as long as it's been around, and it's and we don't let stuff like this stop us. So this is great. Maybe the first thing that I'd like to say, even before that, is just what the nature of this economic crisis or problem is. Because some people, I hear stimulus, and have a stimulus bill, and what should we do? This is not the business cycle. And so anything that is addressing the business cycle is misplaced. This is not something where all of a sudden a bunch of firms went bankrupt, or bad investments, or lack of aggregate demand, or whatever school of macroeconomics you subscribe to. This is not the business cycle. Government simply said, okay, close a whole bunch of businesses, everybody stay home. So there's no mystery as to what has happened here. It's the government shutdown. Whether that's epidemiologically warranted, I can't say because I'm not an epidemiologist, but that's what the problem is. And you can't fix it by stimulating demand by pouring money into the system. I guess that's the first thing I would say. The second thing has to do with maybe the cash payments. What scares me about this situation, or what I think is serious about the situation, is that you have a bunch of people who can't go to work because of this. And so therefore they're without incomes, a lot of them. And you have businesses that don't have a cash flow because they can't operate. So you can do that for a day. You're sick, you stay home for a day. Or your business shuts down for a day because the pipes broke or something. But a week becomes more difficult. A month, all of a sudden you're missing rent payments, mortgage payments, loan payments, things like that. You don't have an income to buy food. So the longer it goes, the more dangerous it becomes. If businesses don't have a cash flow for a month, how many businesses survive? I just saw a survey that was done by Goldman Sachs that predicts that 90% of businesses get into trouble, small businesses get into trouble with a 27-day, I think it was a 27-day shutdown, basically a one-month shutdown. They might not survive. So the idea of the cash payment does make a kind of sense, because if you simply dump money on those people, they can pay their rent so that when this ends, they are at that point bankrupted and those businesses are still there so they can go back to their jobs. That you can't turn off the switch on the economy, flip it back on and expect it to run the way it was running if a bunch of businesses that used to be there are now gone. They won't be able to bring their people back. Now, it isn't stimulus. It doesn't undo the damage or cover it up or anything else. It simply spreads it across a whole bunch of taxpayers or people who are using the now inflated currency or whatever. So it's simply spreading that damage out, but it might be a less destructive way of suffering that damage. So I guess that's the first thing I would say about it. That doesn't really address about whether this is a foot in the door for UBI or anything like that, but maybe somebody else wants to say something, or we can continue on this.
Yeah, I kind of want to say a little bit about, would it be better, like, if the stimulus package, the full amount was just the cash payments to people? Like, what does there have to be those separate, like, loan forgiveness and like stimulus, money to like all these businesses and stuff? Or what would be like the best way?
Yeah, so first of all, this is such uncharted, we haven't ever done this before. There's no precedent. No, we didn't cover this in graduate school, believe it or not. So good question. Everybody's sort of making this up as they go along. It seems to me, so I don't need, I'm going to apparently get a $2,400 payment. I don't need it. Great, I'll get $2,400, but I don't need it to survive, over the next month. I'm still getting paid. I've got savings, but the woman who cuts my hair has 3 daughters. She's divorced. She's taking care of her 3 daughters. One is in college doing an engineering degree. I know from talking to her that their full income comes from her hair cutting work, and she's helping pay her daughter's way through college. She's saving for the others to go to college. She's paying the food and the rent and things like that. How does she go for a month without an income? So maybe dumping some money onto her just protects them from all ending up homeless and getting kicked out of school and things like that, so they can kind of pick up where they went off. So targeting it makes a kind of sense. Well, what about to businesses? If a business needs a cash flow, and without that cash flow, it goes bankrupt. So think about the sandwich shop here in town, Handmade Sandwich, and I don't know anything about their financial situation, but if he's got loans out, if he can't service his loans, what happens if he basically has no business for a month or has very little business for a month? Is that place gone? And then what happens to his employees when they finally can come back? There's nothing to come back to. So it makes sense to me. Like they just had this, it was just announced, I think yesterday, but this is this actually came from my bank, I think, or maybe, anyway, this is I don't know if you can see that. The small business announcement that came from my banks is supporting small business, the Paycheck Protection Plan, PPP. Wonderful. But the idea is that they can take out these 0 interest loans that they can pay back. And then if they keep their employees, there's a lot of debt forgiveness in that. I don't know, maybe it's an emergency measure, like this is a catastrophe, and that's a costly program, but it may not be as bad as the fire you're putting out or something like that. Mm-hmm. A little bit like house is on fire and you spray water on it and you're doing water damage, but it's not as bad as having the house burned down. But it isn't stimulating you out of the problem. And yeah, so to Calvin, it should be targeted. Like putting money into the Green New Deal and the Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts and crap like that. That stuff is just people smuggling in their political agendas, and that has no place in it at all. I think that's dishonest at best.
Yeah, and there's a lot of that in there.
Yeah. There's a whole bunch of it.
And actually talking about the payroll protection program, so kind of the stats on that, so you can get loans up to 2.5 times your monthly payroll, up to $10 million.
Yeah.
And you can use that money 50% for payroll, and then 50% for like other things, like, I don't know, like inventory and other stuff.
Yeah.
I don't know. What do you guys think of that? Is that enough?
Does that
Or-
cover hourly workers, or is that limited to salaried employees?
So it's if you keep paying your workers up to 75%, or you can't go lower than 75% of their full quarter salary and or wages. So yeah, it includes salary.
I think it's both. Yeah.
I don't know. Any thoughts?
And it's got some kind of a cap of 100,000, I think, is the max you could pay somebody out of this something. I mean, I haven't had a chance to look at it and it's, it's like any of these things. There's all kinds of red tape and footnotes. I've just got some summaries here.
I guess my real question is like, how does that help new businesses? Because I think Calvin, you and I were talking about how there was that new hair place in town, like right across from McDonald's, that opened like only a couple weeks before the crisis, with no customer base established or something like that. Even if they can float themselves a couple months without people being able to come there, know that there's a new store, establish a relationship there, and go like, hey, this is a good place to get your haircut. Like, I think they might be toast. And I think a lot of businesses that opened only within a few months of this crisis might be done regardless if they can float themselves through.
One thing that I think is kind of interesting to think about with all regard to this is convertibility. So there was an article I read by Tyler Cowen in Bloomberg recently, and he was comparing this crisis to World War II, as opposed to the common comparison of 2008. And he was making the point that back then, it was kind of like, okay, we're going to shift all of this production toward more useful wartime economic goods.
Mm-hmm.
But one difference here is that the part of the economy that's most hurt is the service sector, because government's saying it's not that you can't convert your services to something else because there's low demand for haircuts or something. It's that you can't work. You can't provide these services. So like if you're the hair cutter, it's not like you can just say, okay, maybe I could go do construction for a little bit. It's the government is stopping you from working.
Maybe the analogy for World War II is that not that we're like the U.S. in World War II, we're a little more like Poland in World War II. You can't run an economy when you're under when things are being shut down because you're under some kind of assault. Somebody had asked me about that on earlier, not here, about whether or not, this was sort of an interesting question. They'd asked whether or not the decrease, the collapse of some sectors like all a service industry, hospitality industry, services in the sense of like hair cutting and things, the collapse of those things might be offset by increase in other sectors like food or toilet paper industry or whatever. Well, first of all, I mostly answered that from the standpoint of just thinking of, well, does that balance the aggregate demand? Which no, it doesn't. But it struck me that maybe, I suppose you could say, not thinking about a shift in demand, but you could shift if all the healthcare workers, if all the people who work in restaurants and hair cutting and things like that could shift into these lines that aren't shut down. Okay, then you shifted actually more your supply in a different way. But that seems like a really long-term kind of a prospect, and also one that a lot of people are going to have very difficult. Those are deep structural changes in the economy you're talking about at that point.
Yeah, it also seems to me kind of naive to tell people or businesses that you can easily switch production when, like, specifically in econ terms, talking about how like capital is specific, an automotive plant really can't change itself, as far as I know, to make masks or something that's helpful. Does it seem naive for the government to being like, well, let's switch over to making essential products, when that isn't as easy as it sounds?
Well, I don't know. It depends. So this guy that has the pillow factory switched to making face masks and things like that. There's a lot of stuff. There is a lot of ability to retool and to switch. And so I think they can make, what are they? The ventilators and things like that. So an automobile plant, that can make machine stuff can switch. They can retool and to an extent, and
Okay.
that's a matter of degree. I think that is possible. You know, World War II. This is the example I use in our history of economic thought class. But Singer Sewing Machine Company started making firearms, and they made stuff that was high quality, and some of them are collector's items now. So you can do that, but some of that it can be done pretty quickly, I guess.
Okay, that's fair. And I've heard too, with like the advent of new technologies like 3D printing, I've read a couple articles talking about how people have developed ventilators and stuff that could be 3D printed and everything. So I think that technology is pretty interesting, and how things that were only 10 years ago were like novel are now actually contributing to like helping with the crisis.
Yeah, I saw some 3D printed masks that were being done in, strangely enough, I think that the design was invented in Billings, Montana, at a hospital maybe, and they sent the design to I think it was the School of Mines in South Dakota, and they started printing 3D face masks that have a changeable filter that you can stick in, and so they're doing stuff like that. So it is kind of amazing how this stuff can kind of shift around. One of the things I will say about that is that anything that this is actually a really important point, because it's the United States is actually well situated for doing things like that because of our relatively free market system. It's the regulations that supposedly, you know, for the public good, that make that more difficult. And so we've got in Michigan, well, actually in many states, but in Michigan, for example, the governor just decreed that, okay, it's all right for distilleries to make alcohol for something other than drinking. And they can do that easily. So they're making hand sanitizer or alcohol for hand sanitizers now, but it's regulation that blocks that, also at the federal level. Alcohol production is so heavily regulated. I mean, they're terrified that somebody might actually make moonshine or samaganka or something like that at home. Samaganka is Russian moonshine. I mean, like, big deal. It's like, so what? And so that's so heavily regulated. There are all these regulations that make it more difficult for the private sector to respond to this. And one of the most important ones are and this is one that gets me really steamed, are the price controls, basically de facto price controls right now that we have on goods. So they're so worried about price gouging. You know, the governor of Michigan and the attorney general are saying they're investigating. They've got a hotline you call up if you think prices are too high, and they will crack down. Yeah, let's put all the sellers out of business. That should work. Throw them in jail. You want prices to go up. Demand just went up for a bunch of goods. You want prices to go up because these goods are in more demand. So you'd like people, therefore, to use them more carefully. Don't waste them. That would help to shut down these runs on things and the shelves being stripped. And it would also, those higher prices send a signal to producers that these particular products are now in more demand. Therefore, it's going to be worth your while to spend more in producing them, buy more resources, pull more resources from other lines of production into this, so you can make more hand sanitizer, more toilet paper, more of whatever it is that is, you know, that is being sold. And instead, you put on price controls, even if it's just a threat to prosecute you if your prices go up more than 10% or 20% or whatever they're saying right now. And so you shut off that signal. That helps create shortages. That makes things worse. It makes it harder for the private sector to get done what needs to be done. That kind of thing is just, when politicians do it, they posture about how moral they are, but they are hurting people with that. You know, it's outrageous. I didn't rant nearly enough.
That also raises the question for me of preparedness. Like, do you think regulation has been harming our preparedness as an economy? Does government have any obligation to ensure that? I mean, not that you can really anticipate something like this, but
I was actually just reading something this morning about kind of preparedness, and And you know, like we'd had sort of a, I don't know what they call it, strategic stockpile of masks and ventilators and things, and that sort of thing. That was actually kind of drained down. It was actually the I know that, and it's probably not all Obama's fault, but during the Obama administration, that stockpile went down, and it was recommended to the federal government at that time. Some parts of the federal government recommended to other parts that stockpile be built up, and it did not happen. This come out because of one of the earlier, the big stockpile had been assembled because of one of the earlier, like swine flu or one of those scares. I don't know that I can't think of anything offhand about emergency preparedness that has been blocked by regulation, but then it doesn't mean that it hasn't. I just don't know.
No, fair enough. Yeah. With the Fed's radical actions, because I know the Fed beforehand was kind of addressing the stock market crash and such. They were already lowering interest rates, and then when coronavirus, they said that they were doing their part. How much of that do you think may be them preemptively trying to prevent a business cycle from happening? Seeing as it's been, 10 plus years since the last business cycle, they happen about these intervals. The economy has been doing extremely well these last few months statistically, which may indicate it's overheating. Trump refuses to let them, pump the brakes or anything. Do you think that this whole crisis could be the trigger of a bigger, business cycle, and that the Fed is trying to cut it off at the pass for once?
I am not sure about that. And I guess I would say that there's a whole lot to unpack in what you've just asked. Okay. And the first is whether or not there was a sort of a bubble, or whether that was real growth that we saw going on. And I'm not so sure that it wasn't, in some respects, real growth. I think this is not some careful econometric study that I've done, but I attribute much of the upswing in the economy to the reduction in regulation and reduction in new regulation that was coming up, and also the tax cut. Up until the Trump tax cuts, the United States had basically the highest corporate tax rates in the world. And bringing those down to Scandinavian levels is what we have, I think made a great difference. Where do you want to do business? In the United States, or you want to earn your income in a different country where it's taxed less? And so that, I think, made a difference. And then I think also regulation makes it, the cut in regulation made a difference. So that's not a business cycle kind of thing. That's more like real growth.
Okay.
But at the same time, we also have these conflating factors of like super low interest rates that have been going for a long time. So there's probably elements of both, and I can't sort out which is which, but I think there's a lot of real growth, and that's not a business cycle story. I think that the whole downturn is attributable to just turning off the economy. You stop working. That's what it looks like to me.
Gotcha. With us turning off the economy, I guess this is a little bit more of a political bit, but I know we've all talked about this before. The Trump's reelection chances, like normally for the president, the number one determining factor for reelection is the success of the economy. And it was doing really well before, but voters, as far as I can tell, voters vote how they feel when they're casting their vote, not over the last couple of years or something. Do you think that will affect his reelection chances? Like, do you think that there's pressure on Trump where if the crisis or the health officials say we need more time, shelter in place, social distancing, et cetera, do you think there will be political motivation to be like, no, we have to stop that and get things rolling, even if people are going to die?
Oh, there'll be no political ramifications to this at all. There will be. Like, who can predict what's going to happen next week, much less how that's all going to work out? It's really it's so difficult. So far as I can tell, this is just everything that's going on has been going on for the last since before 2016. Seems unprecedented to me. So first, the election of Donald Trump really did catch so many people off guard. They weren't expecting that. And I was, in some ways, I thought that the Democrats didn't have a chance. As long as the Republicans didn't run somebody like Jeb, who was, I'm probably right from the start preparing his concession speech, or who's that other clown, the guy, Kasich, or those guys. I mean, those guys have nothing. I think that the Republican Party establishment often wants to be kind of the opposition, so they don't really have to do anything other than complain, but they get to stay in their seats. And I think that's how Bush looked to me. But Trump got in, and that did change things greatly. I don't think that the Republican establishment liked it very much, and they didn't capitalize on it much. But I think he is somewhat cagey in these things. I don't know if he's in a weaker position or a stronger position because of what has happened. He has, I think, as well as anybody can, done a pretty good job with this. Made messes of it in some ways, but I think most of the mess is just, that's what you get with a shutdown. And shutdown might be epidemiologically warranted. I don't know. You may have saved, a million lives or something with this. I'm not capable of saying that. So what happens with the election? Who's going to get the blame for any harm? And that's more of a question of messaging and strategy and things like that. It's a very, public opinion is sort of a fickle thing, and it's hard to say what way it's going.
That's fair. I'm of the opinion that I think if this had happened in a year that wasn't an election year, we'd probably be approaching it very differently. I think all the candidates are terrified to hear, especially in contentious seats. So I think that the election is influencing the policy quite a bit.
He is, I think she's angling to become the vice presidential candidate.
Yeah. That's fair.
Democrats, or even the presidential candidate. Why not? I mean, their current front runner seems to be totally out of it. And their second place guy is a communist. Let's face it, he really is a communist. But he, doesn't seem to be acceptable to the party establishment. And I think they've been in terror that they have no chance in the election. I think they think at least that this gives them a lease on life in this election. I think that's the Democrat strategy from Pelosi or somebody like this. And okay. I think that Trump may well be capitalizing on this in some way. My personal thought is that in a fair election, Donald Trump wins.
All right, I apologize. I think I have the free version of the software, and I guess we're limited to 40-minute meetings, so it timed out. So I apologize. Dr. Steele, you're in the middle of saying if Trump wins in a fair election.
Yeah, do we have fair elections?
No.
I just asked a question, but I will leave that as an exercise to the listener.
No, fair enough. I think going into the election, we heard a lot of stuff, kind of just bringing it back to what we were originally saying about like universal basic income. I think that a lot of people are going to advocate for UBI after this redistribution.
And Medicare for all.
Yeah, exactly. Because I think, at least I've seen a lot of people, friends and peers on social media expressing their feelings and saying like, look, this is no different and it's great. And even though I agree it may be an adequate measure to addressing the shutdown of all these businesses and these people not having income, I think it's going to be the catalyst for saying, look, it worked.
Well, the first thing to do is to tell them in certain terms, no, this is totally different. This is an emergency payment so that somebody who is out of work can go ahead and pay their rent without being kicked out of their house. And it only works on a temporary basis. You can't run an economy on people not working and just giving them cash. Go ahead and explain how that happens. So this is it really is a totally different thing, and people need to be told that. That's why I'm thinking, when I talk about price controls, I don't want to just say, oh, they're well intentioned. I just want to say, you knock this BS off, because you are hurting people, and you're going to kill people if you keep doing this. You will destroy our economy. There was a guy who had a piece in the New York Times and said, in a pandemic, we are all socialists. And all I could say was bullshit. That is not true at all. You might be able to get away with some socialism when you're a wealthy country and your economy is functioning. You'll kill yourself when you're under these kinds of circumstances. This is when you most need the free market. And if you don't understand it, it's because you don't understand economics. And maybe if you don't understand economics, that's fine. Shut up about economic policy then. I mean, that's really the way you got to think of it. And you have to be able to tell people, look, if price controls, those are damaging. Paying people to not work on a long-term basis, how do you think that's going to work out? You think that's going to make things better? No, you're going to create an incentive for people not to work. One of the really bad things that came out in this stimulus bill was that some Democrats, of course, extended the length of unemployment insurance, so that it goes on longer beyond so that it will extend beyond what we hope is the extent of the shutdown. Well, it's pretty well established that the longer unemployment insurance goes on without you having to look for a job, that the longer people intentionally stay unemployed. They don't have an impetus to go out and get work. If you shorten that time and say you have to go out and you don't get unemployment unless you're actively searching for work, and that's going to run out at some point. You got to be searching for work and trying to get back into the job market. You can't run an economy on people not working. How's that going to work? And so this is detrimental when they do things like this. And the same thing, student loan forgiveness. It makes sense to have some forbearance when people are all pushed out of work by decree. They would be working if they weren't told you can't go. Well, okay, give them also some loan forbearance or some kind of a break there. But to have that as a permanent policy or that makes no sense. To set that up and we're going to cancel all debt. Good, let's just destroy all financial markets. That makes a lot of sense. Actually, it doesn't make sense, but these days when you say something sarcastically or as a joke, you have to point that out because people say such crazy things these days, you never know.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And I think it's that ties into a lot of young people believing that it's simply as easy as just canceling the debt for a lot of students who made the decision to go to school and take out a ton of money.
Well, they see it as a right, almost a right to college.
Yeah, absolutely.
I saw a very nice meme. It was Bernie Sanders saying that it's wrong that so many students took out these big student loans, got a degree, and now they're unemployed. So he wants to make college free so that it's free for everybody to be unemployed. At any rate, just a little bit about my point about socialism and whether that's a solution for anything. There was Johns Hopkins University Johns Hopkins has one of the leading medical schools and colleges of medicine and public health in the world. And they do a regular survey of countries, of nations, as to how strong their hospital systems and things are. The United States ranks number one in the world as being prepared for a crisis like this. So we hear that, the US healthcare system is no good. There are some problems that we have, but it's not that our healthcare system is no good. We have actually a pretty strong one. Apparently, according to Johns Hopkins, the strongest in the world. That was prior to this pandemic, but ranks highly.
There seems to be sort of a strange implicit assumption out there that governments would be better at anticipating events like this than the private markets. Like there's war socialism and then there's corona socialism. Like people get scared and they want security. So they think, well, markets clearly can't supply all of these goods that we need because there's shortages. Therefore, we need socialism to come about, and because they would predict all of this.
Well, I know it is true that really totalitarian, authoritarian governments are very good at responding to these things. That's why this originated in China. And that's why Iran, for a while, was the second hardest hit country in the world. That's such bunk. That's just ridiculous. That socialist or authoritarian, powerful governments know what they're doing or are capable of addressing this.
North Korea's done a pretty good job.
They were
Excuse the
social
carrier.
distancing before it was cool.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. They're killing everybody by other means. So,
Yeah.
but actually, no. It'd be interesting to know what really is happening in North Korea. China recently announced zero. For one day they had 0 new cases. It's a lie. I mean, come on, it's just a total lie. You know that Chinese were talking about their total numbers of deaths, but then somebody said, yeah, well, look at the total numbers of urns for cremated bodies that are being delivered to funeral homes, and it's way out of proportion to the number of deaths that are being reported in China. So maybe the Chinese, is it possible they might not be telling the truth the Chinese government might not be telling the truth about this? It seems pretty likely. There was a piece that I had that had appeared in American Thinker that argued that this coronavirus problem originated in Wuhan, but when it got going, because of infighting within different factions in the Chinese Politburo, that President Xi allowed this thing to get bigger because he was using this to discredit some of his political opponents. There were some of them centered in Wuhan, and he wanted to get them removed, and this gave him a chance to do it. And then the whole epidemic gets out of hand and gets going. So I read that thing. It was fascinating. And I know that I've seen a little bit of inkling about that in the South China Morning Post, which is a paper that comes from Hong Kong, English language. And they were talking about things kind of along that lines about who was and was not being purged in Wuhan because they follow the Chinese press. And then I sent it to a few other people, and they said, yeah, it basically corroborates what we know. So political infighting in China is at least part of this story. And, their inability partly is to deal with this thing is partly conscious, partly intentional, I think.
Jeez, that's crazy.
I guess
it's wild stuff.
I guess with political infighting being kind of a topic, do you think that political infighting in the United States in the wake of the impeachment hearings and all that going on had anything to do with us being kind of blind to what was going on in China or not focusing on?
I think so. Is it Tom Cotton who was the first guy in the Senate who was talking about this and was kind of raising the alarm, but everybody else is worried about Russians running the American elections, which I think is whether you like Trump or not, to say that he's a Russian agent at this point, you've just got to be both ignorant and stupid. And I think that very intelligent people become blinded by ideology, and it makes them stupid. But to say that Trump has had a pro-Russia policy at this juncture is so contrary to any sort of fact. But that's the kind of stuff we've been arguing about in Congress. And so, yeah, I think it probably had some effect there.
Okay, so speaking about totalitarian governments and stuff, and they're kind of using this as like a chance to grab power. Like, for example, in Hungary, they just gave their president basically he can rule by decree. Like, he is the state right now. So I think that's just
Yeah,
wild.
I haven't. I've heard little inklings of that, but I have not been following Hungary. I just see people talking about it. In my, it strikes me that Hungary has just moved from the EU ruling by decree there to their president ruling by decree. So good. I don't know, which do you like better? At least he speaks Hungarian.
There you go.
Yes. I don't know what I mean. It's one of the things that also bothers me a lot about what is happening now is the tendency for. So we're seeing all kinds of things. Social distancing, quarantine, lockdown might make a kind of sense, but you have to do it within the bounds of the law, and you can't be just saying, "Well, we're going to decree that this happened," and giving politicians that kind of power. That's very dangerous. And if people accept that, when do you get rid of it? How do you, Massey, Representative Massey is everybody hates him apparently now in Congress. The president hates him. The justices, the judiciary hates him. The bureaucracy hates him because he dared to suggest that when they do things, they do them within the bounds of the Constitution. I mean, that is pretty outlandish, isn't it? They all took an oath to uphold the Constitution, and he's the only one who stuck to it. So what good is your oath if you break it like that? And why couldn't you at least try to do things within the bounds of the Constitution and the law? I understand it's a serious problem. That doesn't mean you get rid of your system just because, oh, there's a problem. Wouldn't it be convenient if we got rid of it? And that's extremely dangerous. Here in Michigan, we have the governor making decrees. And I looked at the Michigan Constitution, but I don't know very much about it. And I can't tell whether, I don't see anything that gives her the authority to do this. I saw that the Mackinac Center seems to, they had an article about this. Mackinac Center is pretty free, quite free market oriented. And they seem to think that this is within the bounds of the Michigan Constitution. But with the initial, when there's a 9-page order for the Michigan lockdown, I read through it and it said, well, the day before I'd read the Ohio lockdown. The Ohio lockdown came the day before, and I read that one. It was very clear and specific what is accepted, what's an essential business. And I read through it. It also made a kind of sense. It was pretty clear to me what is and isn't covered. I read the Michigan one. I have no idea at this point. And I think that was the reaction of many people. Like what is and what isn't, I don't know. But I do know there's a paragraph in there that says, if you don't obey, we're going to prosecute you to the full extent of the law. Well, that's nice. And we keep getting declarations from Lansing that, we're going to prosecute, we're going to prosecute, we're going to prosecute. But it's unclear as to what the boundaries are, what is and isn't prosecutable. So now was it yesterday or the day before, the governor said, look, I said, no frivolous activity. People should understand they were subject to $1,000 civil fines for frivolous activity and possible criminal penalties. And here are the hotlines you would call if you think your neighbors are engaging in frivolous activity. Okay, what's a frivolous activity? What counts and what doesn't? I don't know.
Jeez.
Yeah.
It also kind of brings
I
a question.
mentioned this to one of our adjunct faculty members who said, we were talking last night about how to conduct exams online. He was, I never really, I think she's kind of revealing that I wouldn't say a libertarian. Yeah, I think so. And then he pointed out, he said, these kinds of crises often will bring out who people really are. And he said, she looks pretty totalitarian, doesn't she? Yeah. I don't want her to be the Democrat candidate for vice president or president. or
Yeah.
governor next time around. But
Yeah. Calvin, you're gonna say something?
Yeah, I was gonna say about like these shutdown decrees. Like you don't have to do it. Like if you look at like Sweden, they're not on shutdown, and they're all voluntarily kind of social distancing and not going to markets as often and that kind of thing. But they're still open. Like their economy's still running.
I think the most American thing that I've heard about this whole coronavirus pandemic came out of South Korea, and I think it was the government who stated something along the lines of, "We are a democracy, and we believe that it's not our place to force a shutdown on the people." And they seem to be doing a remarkably good job in handling it. That being said, what they've done compared to what we're doing in terms of testing per million and isolating, I'd argue that the time has passed for us to be able to do that and respond in kind.
Going back to the stimulus package, the 2 trillion or so stimulus package, is there any idea of what kind of time frame that is supposed to be covering, or are we looking at near future negotiations for a second bailout?
that is a super question, and I don't know. It isn't even clear how fast these checks, these cash payments are supposed to come out. And they keep saying all kinds of things. But I would say almost count on it that politicians are thinking that they need to have the next round. I don't know how long, excuse me, this is supposed to, the idea was that there would be a cash payment that would come as early as April 6th or April 7th that would be sent out to people. And then another one in a few weeks or maybe a month or something like that. And that would be a large part of this cash. I think that's, actually, I'm not sure. I was about to give a number, but my number was from an old proposal, so I don't know. And the same thing for small business loans and things. So I think that's supposed to be pretty fast mostly. But then I saw something that some paid checks won't go out until September. And I mean, who knows? I would bet that there's going to be rounds of, especially since politicians like to pack other things into these, there's going to soon be another round of, let's have another round of stimulus.
Another thought I had about that stimulus package was, obviously it'd be ideal if we could only give the stimulus to the people who absolutely need it, but the costs of trying to figure out who actually needs it could be pretty high. So would there be an optimal amount of targeting, or would maybe targeting isn't as expensive as I'm thinking it is?
So that's a really good point, and it's hard to answer. So I was talking with my colleagues, and several of us said I threw out a number of different ideas. So my other econ colleagues, and I threw out several ideas, and I said, well, what about just giving instead a thing where you have to apply? Maybe you apply for a 0 interest loan, or you apply for a cash payment or whatever. And Gary Wolfram's response was, it takes too long. This has to be dealt with so quickly that it's better just to send it to everybody. And if Mitt Romney gets $1,000 or whatever, well, that's not, he doesn't need it, but it was so important to get it out to the people who did that's just a cost that you bear. And then somebody else said, well, no, that's too much of a cost. So it's hard. Again, this is such uncharted territory. It's hard to say. I still think targeting in some way would be a heck of a lot better if we can do it. And it's sort of what they're kind of doing in a way. Since they're basing these things on people's tax returns, I think it's the 2018 tax returns that they're using to determine, since they don't have the 2019. They're using the 2018 tax returns to decide how much and who to send these things to. And also the people who are getting Social Security and things like that, who might not have filed tax returns. So there does seem to be a certain amount of targeting in it. If you're making, there's some amount of money that if each person on the tax, if you're making $100,000 as a single filer or or something similar if you're joint filing, that you don't get the stimulus or you don't, or the payment. Did that answer a question? I guess.
Yeah, yeah.
Can you give us any thoughts you have on what a recovery might or could look like, or the extent to which there would be a recovery?
Yeah, I think that the sooner the shutdown can be ended or reduced, the better. Because if you can, again, if it was a 1-day shutdown, it would have relatively little effect. Everybody would have missed a day of work. A 1-week shutdown have bigger effect. It's when people start missing payments. And there was stuff that I just got it yesterday from another Hillsdale student sent it to me. But it was because his father works for JD Power. This is JD Power data. I have permission to share it. But it was a question about people. It was a survey they did on the JD Power company did a financial services COVID-19 pulse survey that just came out on March 30th. They released it. And it was the effects of this shutdown on people. Well, the number of people who are in danger of missing either a loan payment, a rent payment, a mortgage payment, something like this is pretty high. Some people already have missed them. If that starts to set in and causes people either to go bankrupt or firms upstream to start facing, bankruptcy or something like that, that's when this thing becomes very difficult to recover from. If firms shut down, go out of business, then the recovery is not this V that they talk about where it dives off and then people go back to work. It goes down and there's no business to go back to work to. And now it's a low and a long one. And the longer this shutdown goes, the worse that is. And I don't have a number that speaks to that, but it seems to me that, again, just kind of logically thinking about it, a person who lives paycheck to paycheck has a really difficult time going a month without a paycheck. And so much beyond that, it's like, wow, we're in real trouble for a recovery. That's what I think. People talk about their savings. If you could not work for a month full time, how would you pay for your living expenses? Use money I've already saved is 44%. Credit card and carry a balance, 15%. Loan, 20% of the people said, I don't know. 10% said, I borrow from a friend or family member. There was something about, there was another one about if you had an unexpected $500 bill, like for a car payment, if your car breaks down, you need $500 to fix it, or you have an unexpected $500 healthcare bill or something like that, how would you pay that? And the percentage of people saying, I don't know how I would pay an extra $500 was pretty high. The number of people saying, I'm going to have to put it on my credit card and just worry about paying for it later was pretty high. The number of people who could come up with that extra 500 was I guess not enough. I mean, for me right now, if I had to pay $500, yeah, great, I could do that. For the woman who cuts my hair, I don't know what kind of saving a lot of Americans have. But there was some other number I've seen. I don't remember if it was there or elsewhere, but it was, you start talking about $1,000 in unexpected expenses, and a lot of people can't handle that.
Yeah. I mean, not to diminish the impact that the disease is having, and it's hurting people, it's killing people, but I do think we're at the point where the economic ramifications for the shutdown are going to really hurt a lot of people too.
Let me say something. Maybe I mentioned this, but the economic ramifications. Who's the guy? Cuomo in New York said that the governor Cuomo in New York said, if this saves one life, it's worth it. Okay. Every time you have a 1% increase in the unemployment rate, the mortality rate goes up. you have depression, you have psychological depression increases, you have divorce increasing, you have domestic violence increasing, you have alcoholism and drug abuse increasing, you have heart attacks increasing, you have ulcers increasing, all those kinds of things, and people die from it. It's measurable. I don't have a number for it, but you kill people from economic decline. When the economy goes down, death rates go up. And so you're making a trade-off in life and death on either side of the equation. Because I love beating the drum for economics. Economists often talk about costs, and then I hear from someone, oh, all you economists care about is money. We're talking about human lives. Okay, costs in opportunity costs. The opportunity cost here, we're talking about the lives that will be, human lives that will be damaged or lost from the shutdown. And there is such a thing. And you make the shutdown bad enough and it'll kill more people than the virus will. So you got to take this sort of thing into account. While we're sitting here, my phone beeped and it's M Live, and it says, "Hello, Meijer the supermarket change." Oh wow, unlimited minutes. We're upgraded. It said, Meijer is changing its policies to help spread to help stop the spread of COVID-19. It includes limiting the number of shoppers per trip, limiting the numbers of customers in the store at once, temperature checks of all employees as they arrive. Okay, wow. So we're getting more, I guess it's voluntary, but more and more control over our behavior. Some of you know this, but my wife was in one of the supermarkets here the other day, and many of the stores here have already instituted their own rationing. So you can only buy one pack of toilet paper or whatever. Well, the woman in front of my wife had a couple of kids with her, and the clerk said, "Oh, you can't buy that many packs of chicken wings. You've got 3, and you can only buy 2. I mean, she took it away, and you can taking stuff out of your cart. And my wife said, this woman looked like she was going to burst, the woman and the kids, she said, they looked like they would burst into tears. They didn't say anything, but they bought what they could and went out. And my wife said, it was heartbreaking. So I bought that pack of chicken. She said, "Can I buy that stuff?" She said, "Oh, sure." My wife bought that pack of chicken wings, goes out and finds that woman and hands it to her. And the woman turns to me and says, "Thank you." She said, "I have 9 kids. I can't feed them on rationing. What am I going to do?" Okay. She would rather have no rationing, the ability to spend her money at higher prices and at least have goods that she can get, instead of some politician deciding how much, or some rationer deciding how much is her fair share. But anyway, about it, this kind of shutdown has real effects on people and hurts them physically. It was 20% in this JD Power thing. 20% of the people said that one of the who were surveyed said, it was 20% was the exact number. Which of the following impacts from coronavirus have you already experienced? 20% said unable to get enough food to eat. It's not the coronavirus that did that. It is the shutdown. And maybe the shutdown is necessary. Don't give me this BS about saving one life, because it has these negative effects, and they have real effects on people.
I saw some number the other day, and I forget where I read this, but it was something. It was looking at the recent jump in unemployment claims, something like 3 million over a week.
Yeah.
And I think that works out to something like a little bit under 2% lost employment per week of this shutdown. How do you see that continuing or growing? Or what do the employment numbers look like in 3 weeks if this goes on?
I think it'll get worse if it goes on and on and on. I think it accelerates in a sense, because you'll have business failures. There's something else about this that probably needs some attention. Many of you have read the paper I Pencil by Leonard Read, classic economics work. Everybody should read it. And you guys who haven't, let me know. I will get you a copy of it. But it is a story told by, it's a cute little story. It's like for anybody, it's suitable for grade school or high school or whatever. But a pencil tells the story of how he is made. No person knows how to make a pencil, because literally thousands of people contribute to to that supply chain in different ways. And so when people say, well, this is essential and that's not essential, do they know what they're talking about? We had a student some years ago at Hillsdale, an economics major. He was an older guy who owned his own firm and a factory, and they made, because he didn't have to be there all the time to run it. He did an economics major, and they made plastic pellets. The pellets were used to make food grade packaging. Now that's plastic. I don't know whether that falls, whether some politician in their I want to find something nasty to say. I don't know if the government officials understand always what is and isn't essential or how they determine that, but that's essential. You can say, well, food production is essential, but this guy's just running a factory that makes plastic pellets. Why do we need that? Well, because the plastic pellets are then taken and sent elsewhere, and those are converted into bottles that are used to hold water, juice, things like that. They're used to make other kinds of packaging that you put vegetables in and things like that. And you can't ship that stuff without packaging. The people who don't like plastic, that's one of the things that's keeping us alive, that makes our food production possible. And that's essential. But another essential business would be the people who make parts and pieces for the machinery that run in his factory, and also that transport them. And also the stuff that makes the upstream stuff for those factories. I mean, the whole system is, in a sense, essential. And I suppose we could say that Hollywood is probably not very essential, or something like that. I've wanted to get rid of them for a long time. Because we can, anyway. But it's, this idea that, well, this is the essential stuff because this is food production and this is, gasoline. It is. I was going to link that actually to the point that Joe was making, and I think I've lost that point. But that's actually why the unemployment and things like that potentially can worsen. You break down the supply chains, and you have more and more firms. You can have a cascade of firms that are not able to function. That's why I think that this thing has to come to this shutdown needs to be mitigated as soon as you can.
Yeah, definitely.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it does.
Well, I think we've talked for about an hour. Does anyone have any other questions to be asked or things they want to talk about?
Dr.
All
Steele,
right.
was there anything else you wanted to hit on?
No, the point that I keep making over and over is that ultimately what the economic downturn is, it's really, actually there's one more thing I will say, and that's just there's another part of that supply chain story. I probably should mention it, but that's just that supply chains overseas have been disrupted. So in China, production was really shut down and maybe is getting back to normal. But that of course means that moving through the supply chain, we're going to have a bottleneck that is going to come from lack of parts and stuff. And that's starting to hit here now. So a lot of electronics, for example, and other things that are produced in China will be in short supply here. And that will be another kind of a supply side impact on us. But maybe the most important thing that I would just conclude with is that the economic effects are not caused by the virus. They're caused by our response to the virus. Maybe necessary, but it should be done in the least damaging way possible. And with very much in mind the idea that shutting down and quarantining has these negative effects. And if you're not taking that into account, you're making a grave error. I mean, that's the one thing I'd say. And the other thing is that don't let this make you start foolishly thinking that freedom isn't important, because freedom is extremely important. If we lose that, I don't care about the rest of it. We have to work to regain that.
It's a great thing to conclude on. Thank you, Dr. Steele.
Yes, thanks, Dr. Steele.
Thanks, Dr. Steele.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you,
I'm
everyone,
glad that-
for. Oh, go
Glad
ahead.
that Hillsdale and CLO we keep up and running no matter what.
Absolutely.
Essential business.
It is.
We are essential. With that, thank you so much, Dr. Steele, for talking with us. Thanks, guys, for joining in and making this a part of your day. I appreciate it. We'll figure out how we're going to post this. Probably Dr. Steele, I, and Calvin will chit-chat at some point and figure out how we're going to distribute it. But thank you all. Really appreciate it.
Sweet.
Great.
Thanks,
Thanks.
everyone.
Thank you. See ya.